A lot of legends of the game are putting out music this week. Welcome, metalheads. I'm the host of Heavy Metal Philosophy and writer for Metal Digest, John Barbas. Make sure you stick around to the end of the episode for this week's album art of the week. It's the weekend. That means we got new metal albums to talk about, and I'm bringing you my 5 favorite. But before we jump into the top 5, let's talk about the big news and big releases that happened this week. Waylon Reeves, formerly of Mushroomhead, has a new band called A Killer's Confession and a new album called Victim 1. There's a new record from 156 Silence called People Watching, and after you hear this one, you will know why it's called that. I got my hands on this one early. Y'all know what that means. My written reviews already published in Metal Digest. What I talked about with this one is I was so surprised. I've never thought about it before, how you could mix hardcore, emo, and shoegaze, but this one does it so well. It's so angry and just riddled with anxiety. And now let's wrap up the big news and big band section with some legends of the game. First up, there's a new record from Flotsam and Jetsam called I Am the Weapon. That's right, the OG legends of heavy metal are still going. And speaking of OGs of the game, Gall's side project Trelldom's finally giving us a new album called By the Jados. I also got my hands on this one early, and I was thrilled with this one because it's weird. It's artistic. I would expect no less from Gall. You know, lots of metal bands put saxophone in there for the vibes, but not quite like this. This has the menace of black metal and the swagger of goth with the fun groove of rockabilly. It's got this film noir sort of vibe to it. Words don't do it justice. Go get this one. And since we talked about one of the OGs of black metal, Satan, well, it's kind of ironic that we got a new record from one of the OGs of white metal, Stryper, When We Were Kings. Check out that album cover. That is awesome. I gotta know, is Stryper the most popular Christian metal band? It's gotta be, right? Let me know in the comments. And one more before we jump into the top 5. Bear with me, this one might get a little convoluted. Here's a history lesson. There's a new record from a new band called Legions of Doom. This is their debut record, and it's called The Skull 3. And you might be wondering, that's weird. Why would they name their debut album 3? Okay, here we go. So, one of the OG bands, I'm talking back in the St. Vitus days of Doom, was this band called Trouble. And a couple of members of Trouble left Trouble and they formed a band called The Skull. And then The Skull carried on. Then The Skull's lead singer unfortunately passed away a couple years ago. So now members of The Skull and Trouble have formed Legions of Doom, and this debut record contains a bunch of music and lyrics that were meant to be The Skull's third album. Hence, this is called The Skull 3, and you can definitely hear that this is the spiritual successor of that amazing heavy metal lineage. Isn't that cool? Now let's do the top 5. Coming in at number 5, Fearon with Ethos. This is pagan black metal out of Germany. I'm not normally into pagan black metal that much, but maybe because it's German, I'm not sure, but this is way chuggier than most of the pagan black metal I'm used to. Definitely doesn't have that Norwegian sound. It's quite a bit more aggressive, and I particularly enjoyed how much the choruses reach up to a crescendo. This is heavy pagan black metal. Coming in at number 4, Insurrection with Obsolescence. This is death metal out of Canada. Now, you've heard me say on this show many times when I pick a melodic death metal band that I like that band because it's more death than it is mellow death. This is going to be kind of the death metal version of that. This is a straight up death metal band with some melody. Not enough to make it a melodic death metal band, but enough to where I dig it. And a little bit of groove in there too. There's some times where it really reminds me of Lamb of God, except for more death. Coming in at number 3, Wolfbegum, Life, Knife, Death. Old school hardcore out of Sweden. And when I say old school hardcore, what do I mean by that? Well, you're not going to find much in the way of breakdowns like you would with modern hardcore because the band doesn't slow down long enough to do any breakdowns. It's unrelenting fury all the time. But there's subtle melodies thrown in there so that it doesn't get stale. It's exciting the entire runtime thanks to some clever use of dynamics, just misanthropic and pissed off. So you know I really enjoyed it. Kind of needed a nap afterwards though. Coming in at number 2, Winter Philip, the Imperious Horizon, melodic black metal out of the UK. I also got my hands on this one early, and what I wrote in my review for this one is metalheads often have a negative correlation between melodicism and heaviness. Well, this record, if it doesn't dispel that notion, it should be the exception that proves the rule for you because it's very melodic and also super heavy. It doesn't get very soft very often at all. There's one song called In Silent Grace that has some clean singing in it, but it's epic. And then there's In Earth and Sorrow, I believe it is, that's a classical guitar instrumental that's pretty short. The rest of the record is furious and frigid, the way that black metal should be. Quite punchy, this one. I loved it. And hey, before we do number 1, this is the final warning. Summer is over September 20th. That means the next time you listen to a weekend best new metal album show from me, the summer collection on the Heavy Metal Philosophy merch store will be gone forever. Eventually, I will come out with a new collection for fall and winter. Your boy's got 4 jobs. I'll get to it eventually, but the summer collection is gone forever. This is the last week it will be up in the merch store. So this is your final warning, unless I do it on Tuesday's podcast, but definitely no more on the weekend show. You won't have to hear me spam that anymore. I'll spam something else, but now let's do number 1. Coming in at number 1. Oceans of Slumber, where gods fear to speak, progressive metal out of Texas. And those of you that listened to this week's podcast where I had Cammy from Oceans of Slumber on, you might be thinking, dude, you just picked whoever you have on your podcast as number 1, because I did that last week too. I promise you, it's not because I had her on the podcast that I'm picking this as number 1. Listen to the record and tell me this isn't one of the best albums of the year, much less the week. I promise you, if you listen to Where Gods Fear to Speak, you will not hear another record like this one amongst all the other metal bands putting out records this year. It is unique musically, it is unique rhythmically, it is unique thematically, and of course, Cammy's voice, that soulful gospel influence, and her unique screams. You're just not going to hear anything like it. It is number 1 easily, despite my bias. Go get this one for sure. This one's going to be on more than just weekly lists. But I'm not done putting out cool stuff because we still got Dealer's Choice and the Album Art of the Week. Now, this week I did a lot of melodic metal. So for the Dealer's Choice, I'm going to slide the audience a bone here for those of you that like it abrasive and raw. There's a new EP from Heraclean called Necroverse. This is old school death metal out of New Orleans. Shout out Austin. And if you like it abrasive and old school, this is it. This really reminds me of bands like Morbid Angel, Death, and you can hear that it was recorded on tape in a room. I complained a little bit in my review that the guitars sounded a little thin. Maybe if they would have doubled them, that would have thickened them up a little bit, but they did no studio tricks. No quantizing, no computer anything, no effects, no filters, drums, microphones, a room, tape. This is old school death metal, and I'm not picking it just because of that. You might call it a gimmick or lack of a gimmick. The songs, tight songcraft here. These are ones that are going to stick in your mind if you listen to them, so make sure you check out Heraclean. Now let's do some fun album art. My favorite album art this week comes from Pincer Consortium. It's called Gemini Schism, and check this out. Now, oftentimes cubes are used in modern art, and particularly in sci-fi movies. Usually the cube represents some sort of incomprehensible force, some sort of ancient entities that the human mind can't possibly grasp, and it usually causes some sort of madness. Well, this has that, as well as this sort of fungal growth over it, which is kind of the other thing you see in movies. There will be some sort of mycelial fungus that causes madness. So here you have both worlds. You have some, like the cube, angular space madness, but then you also have the plant-like, the swampy, ancient ones sort of madness as well combined, plus the black and white color scheme is just giving me all sorts of unsettled feelings, and it fits perfectly with the sound of this progressive death metal. And this isn't prog that's like, look how good we are at our instruments. It's prog because it sounds weird, and they're not typical death metal riffs. It's just got really nasty vocals. That's what makes it death metal, but the music is just all over the place. Fits this art perfectly, or rather the art fits them perfectly. You let me know which one it is. Definitely a band worth checking out. And like I said earlier, we had Cami from Oceans of Slumber on the podcast. We sort of bonded over what it's like to be a Southern metalhead. We talked about our journeys, leaving Christianity behind and getting into extreme metal, how our families dealt with it. Lots of different cool philosophical things. I asked her the question I ask everybody, and she gave me a really great answer that is sort of in my bank of what I think about free will versus determinism from now on. If you're curious about that, just click right here. But most importantly, read philosophy, listen to metal. I love you.